Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar where we will discuss plug-in solar basics and our white paper, Disproportionate Regulation of Residential Plug-in Solar. My name is Stacy Washington, and I am the Clean Energy and Equity Director at SACE. Before we start the webinar, and as people are still joining, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. We are accepting questions for this webinar. However, with over 300 attendees registered and limited time, we may not get to all of the questions. If you would like to submit a question, please do so through the Q&A box located on your Zoom screen. If you're with a member of the press, we ask that you please note which publication you're with when submitting your question. If you do not get to your question, it may be answered in the full white paper, which is available on our website, or alternatively, you can reach out to us via email. I'll now turn to a little bit about SACE. Next slide. For 40 years, SACE has promoted responsible and equitable energy choices to ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. We continue to do so today as we discuss plug-in solar. This webinar is going to be a conversation, not a series of presentations. Steve will walk us through the topic and will take your questions at the end. There will be plenty of time for questions after the discussion. As a reminder, please put any questions you have in the Q&A box. I will now introduce the panelists. Today's panelists are Amanda Arthur, Stephen Smith, and Stefan Scherer. Amanda Arthur joined SACE in 2026 as Distributed Energy Manager. She works to advance distributed energy solutions across the Southeast. Prior to joining SACE, Amanda worked in climate and resilience planning in South Carolina, supporting statewide initiatives focused on energy, sustainability, and community resilience. Stephen Smith has led SACE as Executive Director since 1993. Under his leadership, SACE has grown to be a premier voice for clean energy issues in the Southeast region. Stefan Scherer is the CEO and co-founder of Craftstrom, a renewable energy company that specializes in plug-in solar and battery systems. He co-founded the company with his brother Michael in 2019 to democratize clean energy for renters and homeowners. Let's welcome Steve, who will lead the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm excited about this webinar because plug-in solar is a red hot topic across the United States now, and it's been a red hot topic in Europe and a number of countries there. And so we're going to get into all of that. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to orientate us, but first of all, I'm going to do my little rant on my love of our nearest star. So in 1 hour of one day, the amount of solar energy that comes down to the Earth exceeds all the energy humanity uses in a whole year. This is a phenomenal resource. It is the most reliable resource we know. It's been creating life on Earth for over 13 billion years or something. So it is incredibly reliable. And it is provided freely. It rains down on us every single day. And solar can lead to an energy economy of abundance if we as humans become smart about how to capture it and take advantage of it. We should learn a little something from our friends, the plants, who have been taking advantage of the sun for millions of years through photosynthesis. And solar panels are, a way to capture that energy that humans can use it in creative ways. Fossil energy leads to an economy of scarcity, and we can see with all the craziness that we're witnessing across the world. And so, quite literally, sun comes from heaven and fossil energy kind of comes from hell. And so we are all about expanding solar power as much as possible. And so at SACE, we support all market segments. So you've got utility scale solar, which is usually something above 1 to 5 megawatts, larger than that the utilities provide, and they're extremely large solar facilities, and they provide power at the utility scale, which is great. We think that's very, very important. We're also very supportive of community scale solar. This is smaller than usually smaller than the larger utility scale, but they're sort of the utilities work and there's partnerships, there's sort of a joint ownership, a joint sharing of benefits. These are critically important. Then you have customer-owned solar where you can have rooftop solar that can either be interconnected with the utility where you're, providing and selling it back through net metering provisions and other things like that, or it can be behind the meter. We're also seeing that a number of these larger systems and even some of the smaller systems are using agrivoltaics, which basically allow us to work with the environment and have agricultural activity happening, whether it's raising livestock or whether it's supporting pollinators or growing crops, all these kind of things. Those are all critically important. But today's focus is on an emerging technology that is really gaining a lot of momentum, and that is what's called plug-in solar or balcony solar. And this is literally something that you can plug into the electrical socket at your house. And you can kind of think about it as an energy efficiency appliance in the sense it's like you're plugging in an appliance, and what it's doing is help offset the energy use at your house. So that is what today's topic. All these other forms of solar are viable, and we want to support them and SACE supports them. But this is a really hot little topic, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Next slide. So what is plug-in solar? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to turn it over to Amanda to let her get into the details. A lot of people have never heard of this. And so Amanda, why don't you sort of walk us through some of the basics on plug-in solar or balcony solar?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. So like Steve said on the last slide, plug-in solar is also called balcony solar or sometimes plug-and-play solar. And it's a small photovoltaic system, which is solar panels, typically under 2,400 watts, and that plugs directly into an outdoor outlet. It sends the power that it generates directly into your household and goes directly to the appliances or other things that you have plugged into your outlets, where it's then offsetting a portion of your electric bill. And also, like Steve said, I think of it as energy efficiency device. So it's not going to power your entire household, but instead it's going to reduce the electricity that you're pulling from the grid. So it's simple, affordable, and accessible. And also the installation is really easy and doesn't require contractor or roof work.
Well, so let's differentiate it a little bit further from basically what a lot of people are experiencing, having some experience with rooftop solar. What is fundamentally different between this and a rooftop solar system?
Yeah, I think of plug-in solar as being kind of complementary to rooftop solar. It's not a replacement for it. So rooftop solar is great for homeowners that have the right budget and the right roof. Rooftop arrays are much larger and are going to generate more power. So plug-in solar is a smaller system. It's because it's so much smaller, it's also much more affordable, and that opens up access to solar energy to households that have been traditionally excluded from solar. So you're going to see, renters, apartment dwellers, military families that are moving all the time. People with shady rooftops are now having access to solar energy. So you can even think of it as kind of like a gateway to rooftop solar, and it's possible to have both. So I think, Steve, don't you have both at your
I
house?
do. I do. I think of plug-in solar sort of as a gateway drug to doing all the other solar things. So it's a wonderful opportunity. And this picture here is actually of a couple that has solar and plug-in solar on their balcony and their roof in Maryville, Tennessee. Well, Amanda, let's go a little deeper. So if somebody was to buy one of these kits, what do they actually get? What comes as part of a plug-in solar kit?
Yeah, so a kit's going to come with one or more solar panels, and then you get a micro inverter, which I have one right here. And then you're going to have your connector cables, which, as you can see, just has a normal outlet plug. And then for systems that are over 100, I'm sorry, 420 watts, then you should also have a breaker masking safety device. And then it works basically by the sunlight hits the panel and then is converted to direct current or DC power, and then goes into the microinverter where it's converted into AC power. That's the type of power that we use in our households. So then that runs through that cable into your outlet, and your home uses that solar power first before it pulls from the grid.
Wow. So what's really exciting is this is starting to really catch on in the United States, but it's actually been red hot in Europe, particularly Germany. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Germany actually has over 1 million registered units. They're not required to register them, so it's estimated that there might be almost 5 million units in Germany. And in Germany, you can buy it at IKEA for 340 US dollars, a 800-watt kit. So the price has dropped significantly as more manufacturers have started offering kits in Germany. It's been going on for about 5 years now. And then balcony solar is also widely deployed across the Netherlands, Austria, Spain, Switzerland, and other countries in Europe. So it's a mature, proven technology over in Europe.
Well, so Stefan, you and your brother actually have done a lot of work in the European market. Why don't you tell us a little more detail based on your experience of what you've been seeing over there and what you've been involved with?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, we started looking into this technology in 2016 when the first legislations came out in Europe, specifically in Austria, and it it immediately grabbed us because we all grew up in major cities, and that's one of the dominating factors in Germany, especially high urbanization rates, high rental rates, right? So traditional solar wasn't really an option for a majority of the market, and that's kind of why it developed this quickly in Germany. And as Amanda mentioned, there's millions of systems now in play. Uh, it's always amazing to me how quickly the market developed there. We went from a couple of thousand systems in 2019 to millions of systems in 2022, 2023. So similar growth curve as like the iPhone, for instance.
Yeah.
That's because, as you mentioned, it's essentially an energy appliance. It is that simple. It's something you plug into an outlet, it starts generating um, and alleviating your electricity bill. I mean, that's the main point. But there's so much more behind it that we're going to talk about later too. But as we're seeing here parallels to the United States as well, the way it's being accepted, the way it's being handled by politicians. Most people are not aware that the National Electric Code actually introduced articles that made this legal in 2020. So the technical standards have been in development for some time. And whether it's NEC, UL, we'll also get to that a little later. Um, we're seeing a similar curve in how everything's happening. Austria 2016, Germany 2017, and then it kept evolving from there. You learn with the market. Thankfully, we can use these lessons learned in Germany, and we're applying them here in the States. But it turns out, after all this, after all the discussions, whether we can trust consumers with these devices, um, if you provide consumers with just a modicum of education and tell them the benefits and how they can use this and how this will help them, they're very good at adapting and using this technology to its fullest potential.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think this is so fundamental for people to understand that while it is new in the United States and a lot of people are just beginning to hear about it, it has been very well established and going very strongly in Europe and with a lot of success. So I think that for people who have some concerns about does it work, is it safe, the fact that there's millions and millions of systems already going. Now the European system is a little different. We'll get into that in a little bit, so we won't go there now, but we will help people understand subtle differences. But again, the foundational thing is that this is working and it's helping people in Europe lower their bills. And given the war in Ukraine and other things like that, it's been absolutely critical. And one of the reasons that it's been spreading so quick there.
Yeah, millions of systems and not a single incident where a system was used based on, manual as you were supposed to use it. Not a single incident.
That's great. So, Amanda, let's go back and so let's talk for an American homeowner. What are some of the benefits? I mean, what should people sort of be looking at of why this could be beneficial to their bottom line and the benefits to the environment?
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits. So first off, plug-in solar is extremely accessible and simple. It works anywhere where you get sunshine and you have an outlet. So households can place it wherever they get the most sunshine on their property. And then also you get to take it with you when you move, as opposed to a rooftop array that's attached to your house. Also, when you pair it with a battery, then it can run your refrigerator or heater or other appliances during a power outage, which adds resilience for your home. And also, it has a really meaningful climate impact when it's deployed at scale. So, for example, if you deploy 1,800,000 watt units, that would offset about 310,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent every year. So it's very affordable too. And I like that households can kind of build their solar generation as their budget allows. So maybe you can afford a 400-watt system now, and then you can string them together. So, next year you can add another 400-watt system. So it's very flexible.
That's great. That's great. Um, so then, so let's talk numbers and cost a little bit. Why don't you give an example here about what may be some of the cost savings based on what we see right now?
Sure. So let's go with 800 watts because what I've been kind of using as examples so far. An 800-watt kit right now in the United States costs about $1,200 on average. I do want to say that an 800-watt system will rarely, if ever, actually like produce 800 watts of power in an hour. You'll have things like clouds, shade, the angle that you place your panels at, and the air temperature are all going to affect the efficiency of the panel, and how much it produces. But in the sunny southeast, when we're considering those factors, then we can estimate that 800 watts will generate an average of 2 to 2.5 kilowatt hours per day. And that's enough to run your refrigerator for 2 days or power your TV for 30 hours. Also, depending on your utilities rate per kilowatt hour and the environmental factors that I just listed out, 800 watts would save a southeastern household about $175 a year on utility bills. So that's a payback of about 5.6 years. Depending on your home size, your energy use habits, and the environmental conditions, it's going to offset about 10 to 30% of a household's utility bill. But the system keeps producing electricity, clean electricity for 20 years, maybe more.
Great. Stefan, you guys have been putting a lot of these systems out in the market, been talking to consumers. What's your experience with sort of the savings and stuff, the satisfaction people have been feeling?
Well, absolutely. I mean, as you can imagine, in Germany, production is a lot less than the Southeast in the United States. But within our customer group in the United States, very similar to this, payback periods kind of also depend on obviously your electricity price. So in California, some of these systems will pay themselves off in like 2 years rather than 5 or 6 years. Um, but, and I always want to point out that it's not just the solar production that saves money. It's everything that comes with it. So, say you get it with a power meter for an 800-watt system. We'll talk about that too. That's the breaker masking device is required. Um, but you should also see it as a benefit. Like it tells you when you're using power and how much you're using. And that paired with solar production is kind of like a lesson on its own. It typically helps people save money, even more money in the long run, because now they're aware, okay, well, I'm running too many appliances at this time when I don't have solar power, I could turn them on. I could turn on the dishwasher when I do have maximum production midday, or I can shut off lights or other appliances when I don't need them. So total benefit is much larger than just solar production.
No, that's really important. I mean, we at SACE for a long time have felt like that smarter consumers make smarter decisions about how they use energy. And you can think of the analogy when you drive your automobile, whether it be electric or fossil fueled, you get immediate feedback on the energy you're using because you can see the gauge, either the battery or the gas tank met measuring, and you get that immediate feedback. But if you think about with your electric bill, you get the only feedback you get is usually about a month later when you actually get the bill, and then you can't associate your behaviors and everything. So this is why things like real-time pricing and everything are so important that SACE has been advocating for with a lot of the utilities. But I've used the Craftstrom app, and you can see in real time what's happening with both your home and how it's the spikes and stuff based on what appliances come on and various things that are happening, and then also the solar production. And that creates an awareness about being a smart consumer. So I agree. I think it's so important that people become more aware of what's happening at their house with their energy use, and it makes them much smarter and they can make better decisions that can save them money.
Yeah. So
So
offset
yeah,
can't be greater than 30%. Absolutely. It
Yep.
doesn't. That's just solar production. We get customers calling us saying they're saving 70% because they're suddenly aware of what's happening in their home.
Yep. Yep. No, that's so important. All right, so now we know a little bit about the benefits, a little bit about plug-in solar. What we want to do is SACE has produced a white paper that is looking at what are some of the legitimate concerns that we need to be looking out for when we're using plug-in solar because it is plugging into your home electrical system. And then also, what are some things that are potentially going to be used to try to um, maybe put the thumb on the scales to try to limit plug-in solar and other things like that. So the white paper is available to everyone. It's out publicly. We published it, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and went through a lot of sort of peer review with various people. So it's quite useful. So basically, what it does is it shows how the technology works. It shows what the safety, what the over regulations are, and we're going to get into some comparisons where some people will actually buy diesel or gas generators and the rules associated with that versus the rules associated with solar and plug-in solar and other things. So with that, Stefan, why don't you give us a little bit about just talking about some of the safety and overregulation issues that we're looking at. How does the circuitry of the home work? Well, you're muted. Muted. Yep, there you go.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
don't want people to focus too much on this one. We'll explain it a bit better in the next slide, but this is just to give you an overview of how an electrical system in your home works. In the United States, we typically use 120 volts for our appliances. Now, you get essentially from the distribution transformer that's owned by the electric company, you get two cables into your home. Those cables end in the breaker box. And in the breaker box, then your typical circuits, your branch circuits, where you have lights and all the other appliances plugged in, they tap into one of those what we call phases. Yeah, that's hot L1 and hot L2 here in this drawing. And that means that your household appliances are kind of distributed on those two cables. And you've got the breakers that kind of safeguard those circuits, those wires that distribute the energy throughout your home. And so when you plug in a solar system, you're plugging it into one of each of these sides. And it's very important in this use um, that to know that those two sides, they don't necessarily share the power. So if we could go to the next slide, we have an analogy there using water wheels. Essentially, is you can get energy out of both, but they don't really exchange energy because they kind of terminate at the transformer, and that's not in your home, that's outside of your home. So when you're putting in power from a solar panel on one side on into one of these legs, you might be feeding lights, kitchen appliances, whatever you plug into an outlet, but other appliances that are on the other cable are not fed by that power directly. So that's a very, very important point to note because when we're talking about legislation and we're saying, well, a household may have X watts of plug-in solar per household, we need to differentiate. Is it really only per household? Or should we be saying per phase, for instance? Because some appliances, like your dryer, your washer, or your AC, need so much power that they're actually tapping into both of these lines. They use 240 volts, right? So by only plugging into one phase, you're only ever able to offset half of your AC, for instance.
Yep. No, that's really important. So we'll go deeper, and we can go deeper into this as some of the Q&A if folks have questions, because I know that for some people this may be a new concept, but this is basic fundamentally how what's happening behind your light switch or behind your socket. So let's go on to the next slide. Um, so one of the things that we in interacting with utilities across the Southeast began to run into is um, a concern that the utilities have, which is legitimate, that they want to protect the lineman's safety. as as if the power goes out, alignment or reconnecting lines. So there is this concept that if the power goes out, there could be a risk. And so what our white paper really drills into is what are those risks and how do they compare to other technologies that people are plugging in? And so what we want to do is we want to make sure everybody understands the difference between a certified solar inverter, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then also gas and diesel portable generators that are also being plugged in, and what are the risks associated with that. So one of these things is if you have a solar system and the sun is out and for some reason the lines have been disrupted, you may have linesmen out there working on the lines, and you could island the generation at your house. And there is the potential, depending on the size of the system, for that to what's called backfeed and go back towards the the line drop and the distribution transformer, and that could be a problem. So, Stefan, talk to us a little bit about both this islanding concept and the safety associated with a certified solar inverter.
Yeah. Well, you perfectly explained it. That is the main risk that most authorities are worried about, whether it's linemen or whether it's yourself, or your electrician working in your house. He thinks he's flipping a breaker, thinking there's no more power there, and then you're still powering that circuit. Even if it doesn't go out of your house, you could still power your circuit, and that would be a risk, right? So all that has been considered, and it's been considered for years, which is why we have these standards. You mentioned the UL 1741 here on the slide, that ensure that microinverters, that's the standard technology that we use in these plug-in systems, automatically shut down when it detects that there's no more grid, and they constantly monitor this. It's not a few data points while it constantly measures your grid, sees what's going on. We even get that data to show you, the customer. And it also detects weird fluctuations in the grid, etc. And it can handle all of this. So the National Electric Code tells us what we need to do to make it safe. And then companies like UL will talk about that, develop these certifications that ensure that the products that we sell are certified to follow those rules. Uh, and those rules now require that these inverters shut down within 2 seconds. Those are fairly old numbers. The industry standard by now is that all these inverters shut down in less than a second, simply because it's been rules in other countries in Europe. So we adapted automatically. We knew this was coming to the United States too. So inverters are shutting down in, 500 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds even. It kind of depends. Um, but
Yep.
you don't get the same thing from generators, right, Steve?
Yeah, yeah. So let's just make sure everybody understands. So this applies not only to plug-in solar, but if you have a rooftop solar, you have a similar inverter that will actually detect the minute the grid goes down and shut down so that you cannot backfeed from your solar back onto the grid. And it is extraordinarily uh, capable. There's been virtually zero misfires with this. So I just cannot emphasize enough that the 1741 standard, both for rooftop and for plug-in on the inverters, is a proven technology that has for now decades been working and working basically flawlessly.
Yeah.
But now, if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or somewhere and you buy a gas or a diesel generator, they don't have a comparable thing as a 1741 inverter built into them. So why don't you explain that difference a little bit, Stefan?
Yeah, the way these generators are built, it was never the purpose, right? So no one thought of developing standards for that sort of thing. No one was thinking of using regular diesel generators to power your house the same way we're using plug-in solar. Hence, those standards were never developed for that, which is, ultimately not very smart because people are using it because it is a possibility. Using, cords that male-to-male cords, for instance, they can just plug into an outlet, and that's essentially how you kill line workers. Um, because there's no equivalent protection, essentially. They're supposed to keep running and provide power as much as possible.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's jump to the next slide and let's talk again, go just a little bit deeper on the 1741 UL. So talk, a little bit about what it takes to get this certification and who are the sort of entities behind it that are making this standard so effective.
Yeah. Well, before we get to UL, I did mention the NEC, the National Electric Code. That body is essentially that body ensures that we don't burn our houses down. That's minimum regulations to how to handle electricity in your home. And then these companies like UL, this UL stands for Underwriters Laboratories, um, they are registered under the Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and they register as recognized testing laboratories. UL in this case develops the testing standards. So NEC tells us what to do, and UL tells us how to test so we can ensure that we follow those rules. UL 1741 is just one of many actually certifications that are required to run such a system. There's a list of, depending on what you sell, 7 to 10 different certifications. A lot for grid inverters because they're so essential. Um, and there's other organizations that are that provide these certifications. We use Intertech. They provide ETL. That's another certificate. And you can easily identify those when you buy an inverter that typically we mark the inverters with the certification and with the trademark. And yeah, essentially, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. They give us rules to follow. We design our products based on those rules. Then we go to the lab. They test them, whether it's, how fast it turns off at 33% or 66 or 100% of full power. And if there's an issue, we come back, we fix that, we test again. So it's a months long process. That's also very expensive.
Yeah. But so just to emphasize, every single inverter that is out there that is, has uh, been certified must pass this test.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's absolutely no exceptions. So this is one of the most important certifications. And I think we'll also talk about other certifications, UL 3700, for instance, later on. Whatever new certifications are coming for plug-in solar, they're not replacing these.
Yep. Yep.
These stay in place.
So let me also we do this in our white paper because we've run into conversations with utilities. We've had some misinformation. So when just to explain this concept a little bit, when you're generating solar in your house and the solar exceeds what your use is in your house, but the grid is still up, you can actually send power back to the grid. Lots of people call that quote unquote backfeeding also. We want to call that you're basically sharing, particularly with plug-in solar. Now, if you had a large rooftop solar, you might have a net metering agreement or, sort of this buy all, sell all agreement you can have. But for most of the plug-in solar systems, if for temporarily the solar exceeds what you're generating and you are allowed to share it back onto the grid, that is not a problem. That's actually good for the grid in a lot of ways. What we need to clarify is that the only thing that is of danger is that if the grid goes down and the system that you have is continuing to generate power that could, at that point, be fed back on a disabled utility distribution network. What we're saying to emphasize here very, very clearly that if you have a certified UL 1741 inverter, this will not happen. It does not happen. And so this concern for people being injured by solar largely doesn't exist because these inverters are so good. So Amanda, let's talk a little bit about the safety record. Let's go on to the next slide. What's the real world data show here?
Yeah, so for the white paper, we reviewed OSHA records as well as the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health records. And what we found was that there have been at least four fatalities from gas or diesel generators since I think 2000 um, that have been a result of backfeeding power onto the grid and re-energizing the power line. So line workers spoke to a couple of them, and they told us that they're always on the alert for sounds of nearby generators when they're working during power outages, because that is a real, possibility that that could, become dangerous. And so then we also, looked at the records for certified solar inverters, and we found zero injuries or fatalities, not one line worker death. Never in the US, in Europe, not with plug-in solar or rooftop solar, which, like we talked about earlier, rooftop solar has the same inverter that's certified to UL 1741 as well. So yeah, the record shows zero. So incident prevention, which is actually a trade publication that's written by and for utility line workers, actually explicitly confirmed that as well.
Okay, wait. Let's hit this point. This is not SACE as a clean energy advocate or as an environmental advocate, basically creating information that we're generating on our own. In our white paper, we explicitly went into the actual literature of the industry and the line worker safety publications, and this is what they said. No deaths, no injuries from solar inverters, but many documented fatalities from gas and diesel generators. Just, I want to emphasize that.
Yes,
Yes?
exactly. And also, they said in the um, sorry, the incident prevention was the word I'm looking for. They said that certified inverters have been, and I'm quoting here, virtually 100% reliable. So with no line worker injuries from inverter related backfeed. So that was,
So that is critical, and we're going to emphasize this over and over again because what we're concerned about is that plug-in solar is a very low-cost option. But if the utilities put a bunch of redundant, unnecessary requirements on it, it can drive the cost up. And what we're telling you is that with a certified UL 1741 inverter and a plug-in solar system that is well engineered, you're basically, this is not going to be a problem for line worker safety. So Stefan, help us understand from your engineering background why a generator and what's going on with these things. I think they call them suicide cords and other things like that. Why is that so much more dangerous? And yet you don't hear the utility guys out there layering on all kinds of additional regulation when people are walking out the door with diesel and gas generators at Home Depot and Lowe's. You're muted. Yep.
On my first slide, I think I showed the transformer on the very left in the picture from where the cables go into the house. So that transformer, it can do two things. It can either take high voltage power and get it down to 240 to 120 volts to your home, or it could do it in reverse, right? It doesn't differentiate. So when you plug in a generator, typically through what we call a suicide cord, because, well, it's so dangerous, essentially from an outlet on the generator to an outlet in your home. And you do that without a transfer switch to ensure that when the grid is down, it doesn't power the grid. Then that voltage gets amplified to thousands of volts. And that's what can kill and has killed line workers. So that's why instead of trying to overregulate our industry, it would be wiser to add the same safety certifications that we have to go through to these generators.
Yep. Yep. So and this is important. So we're going to emphasize one more and then we'll move on. Next slide. So when we were looking at the comparison between plug-in solar with a UL 1741 certified microinverter, we created this list, and this is out of the white paper, and you can see that uh, anti-islanding protection, meaning that the inverter will immediately shut down the generation so that it cannot access and backfeed. That is a requirement on plug-in solar, but it is not a requirement. They require a transfer switch, but that is separate from the actual technology of the generator itself. So when the grid goes down, solar shuts down less than 2 seconds, many times, often in milliseconds. The backup generator could be running and could be connected to the grid. When you look at what is actually the track record in safety, zero documented lineman fatalities from plug-in solar with the inverters. And then, yes, we've seen multiple examples documented in OSHA and NASHA from documented line worker fatalities and injuries. Um, Transformer step-up risk, what Stefan was just saying about sort of reversing the flow instead of downgrading to 120 or 240 volts, you could actually reverse and step it up. That's not going to happen with plug-in solar, but it is a documented concern going from 120 up to 7,200 volts, which is very dangerous. Then you've got other things that are sort of no-brainers that we know about fossil fuels. You don't generate any carbon monoxide from solar, but you do generate carbon monoxide from, diesel and gas generators. The safety, depends on user behavior, not with plug-in solar, because if, you're not going to get the DC shifted to AC without an inverter, and you're not going to have an inverter that isn't UL certified. So, this is not based on behavior, whereas you've got to make sure that customers with diesel generators have the transfer switch properly installed if they're going to do that, and they're not reaching for some sort of suicide cord to bypass it. So over and over and over again, you see that. And then what's so frustrating to us is you have hyper regulation by the utilities around solar, but yet you basically let these guys walk out of hardware stores and other stores with gas and diesel generators. So this is a very important table to understand, and it's one that when we're talking to the utilities and when we're talking, it's not that we're de-emphasizing lineman safety. What we're saying is, if you're really concerned about the lineman, you should be doing more on the gas and diesel generators instead of over-regulating the solar. Okay, so get off my soapbox here. So next slide, please. All right, so here's another really important thing. Now, this is not so much about lineman safety, and it's more the safety in your house. So, Stefan, can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on the individual circuits and the concept of breaker masking?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned we get power through transformer into the house via two cables. Those are then essentially split up into phase one, phase two with various appliances. And each one of these cables is secured by essentially a breaker that you have in your home, and you'll have two rows of breakers. Now, those breakers actually only they try to find faults within that circuit. So if you're overloading the circuit, say you plug in way too many appliances, on a 15 amp breaker, you're usually only allowed to plug in 1800 watts. Then it'll shut down, it'll flip. That's when you have to go unplug something and then flip the breaker back open, right? But it only measures in one direction. It only measures power coming into the home. So it can't really differentiate between power coming into the home or the solar panel powering that circuit directly. So there's a case where if you're not on a dedicated circuit, so there's two types of circuits. One is a dedicated circuit, meaning you go from a breaker via a wire to a single outlet. In that case, you're pretty much safe. You're basically only limited by that wiring in the breaker. That wire, 15 amp breakers, as I said, 1800 watts, that's the limit. Now, most people don't have such a dedicated circuit. They have typical branch circuits as we've illustrated here. And there it becomes finicky. You see here two illustrations. The top one is the one that kind of shows the potential danger. If you don't know where you're plugging it in, the solar power, the plug-in solar on a regular circuit, versus how you could do it safely, but then you'd have to know exactly the layout of those circuits, which most people don't. I'd wager most electricians don't remember exactly how it's laid out immediately. So for that use case, the NEC gave us an out. It said you can still put plug-in solar on that system. You just have to do one thing. You have to make sure that the total power on that circuit with that solar power doesn't go over those 1800 watts in the 15 amp breaker, for instance, or 2400 watts on the 20 amp breaker. So there's different stages depending on wire thickness, essentially. Um, Now, what some states have done, and that is perfectly safe, and it follows the German idea of 800 watts. 800 watts at 230 volts, by the way, equals 400 watts at 120 volts. That's how we get to the 420 you see here on the slide. Because when you're using only 420 watts, you kind of fall within a safety buffer of that wiring. So you're safe to do that. In Germany, it's 800, and we've got millions of systems doing this perfectly safe, exporting to. Nothing has happened so far, and won't ever happen. But above that, and I'd wager most people want more than that, because in the United States, we use 3 or 4 times as more electricity than German citizens do typically. Then the NEC said, okay, you can do that. Like I said, just make sure that that is safe. You're not, breaker masking is essentially saying the breaker will only know how much is going in. It doesn't know if you're pushing power from the other side and you're maybe overloading, a wire between two outlets as we're showing here. So for that, there's another standard called UL 3141 that says you have to install something like a power meter. And that power meter measures that circuit also specifically. And then there's a simple calculation. It's basically the sum of your usage plus the sum of your solar production can't go over that limit. That's the simple part of it.
Yep. And so we'll have time if people have questions about this in the Q&A, we'll do that. We're gonna because I'm cognizant of the time we're at right now. So let's move on to the next slide. So I'm not going to reiterate all of this. I said it I think pretty strongly before, but basically, there is a regulatory disparity, and we're concerned about that, and I think people need to be educated about it. So please look at the white paper, and if you've got any questions or we can help you with anything, and if you're reaching out, if you're working with some utilities, we can help you there too. So let's move on to the next slide. So what we want to do is look at how plug-in solar is spreading across the United States. So Amanda, tell us a little bit about what we're seeing across the United States and then specifically here in the Southeast.
Yeah, sure. So first, I just want to talk about the goal of legislation. So it's not to make plug-in solar legal. It already is legal. Like, you could go to Craftstrom's website right now and order a kit if you wanted to. So the goal of the legislation is to remove the barriers that are already in place for this already available technology. Legislation is aiming to prohibit utilities from requiring interconnection agreements or inspections or fees, so that any household can just buy one of these systems and plug it in like you would if you went to Home Depot and bought a refrigerator. So across the US, we've seen 35 states plus DC have introduced plug-in solar legislation. 9 of those states have signed them into law. And Utah was the first state to do this back in 2025 in March, and it passed unanimously in both houses. I also just want to highlight that Virginia's House passed their legislation 93-4. So this is strongly bipartisan. Looking in the Southeast, North Carolina still has an active bill, and those are sitting with committees right now for both the House and the Senate side. And then we've also seen some opposition to these bills. So in the Southeast, we saw Georgia and South Carolina, for example, their bills were deferred to 2027. In Georgia specifically, there was some strong opposition from utilities, and they were arguing line worker safety was the predominant argument against the legislation. So that is the utility opposition that they're most strongly arguing for across the country, I would say. But I think that once legislators see this actual evidence that we've been talking about today, then that disparity becomes kind of impossible to defend. So that's why SACE is working with legislators and advocates and just normal voters across the region to try to help educate and empower.
Great. Next slide. So, from a SACE perspective, what we're basically saying, this should be the policy recommendations that are underway, because basically under 420 watts, there really is no serious safety issue at all, as long as it, has the certified inverter, and it should just pretty much be plug and play, just like a household appliance. As you begin to climb up above 420, you've got to be somewhat more aware about the breaker masking issues. But we don't believe that, up to 2.4 kW or 2,400 watts, that you really need all the provisions of a typical interconnect agreement that a lot of the utilities are requiring. But we do think it's important that you're in touch with your local utility company, and that you are, um, you know, demonstrating to them that you've thought through it. Um, Above 2.4 kW or 2,400 watts, you know, we think that it may require more of an interconnect agreement. We think that's you're getting a higher power output, more amperage, and these things need to be thought through a little bit more. So we think at that level you probably do need to be working with your utility in more ways than just plugging it in without identifying it. The picture here is actually the SACE office. We're working with. So we're in the TVA area in Knoxville. TVA has a local power company, the Knoxville Utility Board, and we've been working with them on a pilot. This is actually 2 kW or 2,000 watts plugged into a dedicated 20 amp circuit, and is working at our office right now. And this is just an example. So as Stefan said earlier, because energy usage patterns in the United States, we think it's great. Start with the lower wattage stuff, but we also think that we should be thinking creatively about how to use solar more, and you may want to grow your systems. So let's go to the next slide, because Stefan, I wanted to talk to you. So this is a rapidly developing field. There's a lot of discussions, and there is a current developing standard under UL called 3700. Why don't you talk to us just a little bit about that? And then if you've got questions, be getting them in, because after this slide, we'll be moving to Q&A. And we are going to run probably a little bit longer. So people that can stay with us, we're gonna make time for your questions.
Yeah, I alluded to the fact that we're not getting rid of UL 1741 before. So UL 3700 is a standard draft that was first published in December 11th, 2025. It was then released for certification this January. Um, we, as many other companies, are already working on this. Now, UL 3700 at this point is not a fully developed standard yet. While we can get already certified, it will still change, and it'll take probably 5 to 6 years before we have the fully developed UL 3700 standard. Now, in the meantime, it tries to cover, again, as a draft certification, certain topics that are not covered by previous certifications. So we've got UL 1741 for the inverter safety, right? We've got for breaker masking, UL 3141. So all very well-defined testing standards that we can adhere to and that we can test to. UL 3700 also addresses breaker masking. That helps a lot. It addresses also GFCI. It does require a GFCI device that can measure in both directions, or at least one that measures in the opposite direction of your home GFCI that's already installed. And at the moment, it also addresses the actual plug. It will also address battery sizing. Again, all of that is still very much, it will still be very much discussed into whether it's what is necessary, how strict everything's going to be. Um, but it is in essence an umbrella certification. It is not its own safety certification. Basically, what we say is we've got these existing safety standards, and then how do these products certified to these safety standards work together? That's what UL 3700 does.
Yep, yep. So work in progress, lots of interesting things. Just for so folks understand, GFCI is basically the acronym for sort of ground fault, which I think the current standard is if you're adding receptacles outside of your, an outside receptacle, most of those are required to be GFCI now, I think, across the country. But these are things that are sort of work in progress. So, this has been a lot of information. I appreciate everybody's patience, and so we want to open it up for questions. Let me just say that SACE is very excited about these systems. And for our members and supporters, we are actually selling plug-in solar systems with Craftrum. We were giving them at a strong discount. And so if you're interested in one of these systems, we have them in stock and we are ready to move them. So you can contact us if you're interested. Again, this is really just kind of getting them out there as fast as possible because we think the technology is so fun to play with and such an important. So we're happy to be sort of Johnny Appleseed of solar in the Southeast and trying to get as much of it out there as possible. So Stacy, questions?
Yes, thank you all for a great discussion. We had several questions about legislation. I think Amanda did a good job of talking about that. We did have someone specifically asking about the Southeast in general and Florida. Um, do you have any insight there, or how can someone in Florida talk to their homeowners association about it? And
Yeah. So Florida did not have legislation yet, but there is a growing coalition of advocates in Florida that, I mean, we're meeting, I think, once or twice a month to talk about how to advance some sort of legislation in Florida next year. So that's a work in progress still. And, happy to, if you want to reach out to me, I can talk to you about that. I think also just having conversations with homeowners associations, this is a legal technology, so you can legally buy this and plug it in. And so, talking to your HOA and plugging it in your backyard, or maybe it's less visible, like those are some strategies that I would suggest.
and I can't remember if you mentioned if there was reasons that state legislatures were reluctant to plug in solar.
Really, what it's been has been a lot of strong utility pushback. We've also seen some labor unions that have pushed back in some states. And it's making this argument against line worker safety, really. And so that's why SACE was motivated to write this paper to begin with, is that we were really seeing this pushback from utilities. And from what I have seen, legislators have been interested in wanting to have that conversation, but then also concerned about line worker safety. So then if there's nobody there in the committee to speak up for plug-in solar, then they're really just hearing the utility voice. And so that's why we're trying to empower advocates as well to show up and talk to their committees.
Yeah, and share the white paper because it's very well documented. You'll see, we all the references are there, the sources are there, and it, like I say, has been peer reviewed, and have not gotten any pushback on anything that's in the white paper because it's strongly defended. We're open if people have suggestions of any changes, but like I say, it's a document to be used, and I think it can help undermine some of this hyper regulation or over regulation of this particular technology.
And there's a particular question about Duke Energy. Can you characterize Duke's Energy's current stance on plug-in?
Well, I'm hesitant to speak for Duke Energy. I have spoken with Duke, and I didn't really hear as much of the safety concern from them. So, hoping that we can, continue to have conversations with them and to see if we can advance it in North Carolina. For example, I'm speaking about Duke, North Carolina. So, yeah, I feel hopeful, but I don't want to speak for them.
And let me say this. It is our hope that the utilities want to be partners with their customers and allow them to utilize their home the way they want to and not try to reach in behind the meter and hyper-regulate what people are doing. Um, I think that if you, particularly for, as we were pointing out, smaller systems, 400 watts, 800 watts, um, if you find that you have a utility that is less enthusiastic, you have a right to do what you want to do in your home. I mean, you run a risk if they're, going to try to do something. But I think that the goal here is to try to find common ground with the utilities. But if the utilities are going to be unreasonable, this is a private property issue. This is an ability for what people should be able to do. And I think that, if they can't demonstrate that there's a legitimate safety concern and they're just really trying to overregulate something that isn't legit, then, you need to make your own choice about what you do at your house.
Thank you, Steve. And then we have switching topics now to generally plug-in in the United States and how many homes in the U.S. are using plug-in. Stefan, are you
Yeah.
aware?
How many homes in the US? We're one of three suppliers in the US currently, thousands. We're not at levels like in Germany yet. Absolutely not. The market is just getting started. And we expect that number to grow very rapidly now, especially with legislation and UL 3700.
Thank you, Stefan. And then I have another question on how many hours of direct sunlight do you recommend for on plug-in for 800-watt system to meet that 2 to 2.5 hour, 2 to 2.5 kilowatt hour a day that was mentioned?
That would be a full day essentially to get that much.
Thank you. And we do have several questions about 3700. I think you all did a great job of discussing 3700. Can you address the provision that specialized plug will be required, which will require an electrician to install the matching specialized receptacle? This will potentially make it not plug and play. Is this a stealth provision to hobble balcony solar?
Yeah, and that's something we're going to fight. And as I said, like it's not a fully developed standard yet, so there will be discussions. Typically, whenever a standard is developed or further revised, there is a technical committee at UL. So for instance, I'm on the technical committee for UL 1741 that we just discussed. There will be a similar one for UL 3700 where we, as well as experts within the National Electric Code, for instance, can discuss these topics. I the same, again, a lot of parallels to the German market. The exact same thing was required in the beginning in Germany. That was fought hard. The market didn't accept it too. Um, so customers simply didn't want to follow that standard and started buying regular plugs off of Amazon. Yeah. So that we do need to address that as well. There are other ways of keeping people safe. Why are they doing this? They started with the safety plug idea because larger inverters used for traditional solar typically can take 2 seconds to power down. Now, as long as our inverters are that quick and essentially power down in milliseconds, there is no risk. You can literally take one of our power systems, unplug them, and grab the prongs, and you're going to be perfectly safe. There's this weird edge case that sometimes people discuss is if you partially unplug it and you touch the prongs, then you could hurt yourself, but you can do that with any appliance in your home. So that is not exclusive to plug-in solar that, your hairdryer can do that. So yes, there are certain safety standards to address, but we argue it wouldn't have to be a fully lockable special plug device. Yeah, we will be fighting that. And also, while we're getting our certification now, we're experimenting with simple plugs that retract, for instance. So that means that there is no chance for you to touch any prongs as soon as you unplug them. Either the prongs retract or you have a spring-loaded safety device on top. So there's other solutions. And UL 3700 at this stage is not as concrete as other standards, which is why, and I saw that question in the comments why some Chinese companies are now claiming, oh, we're UL 3700 certified. No, they're not. They're UL 3700 compliant, kind of the way we are as well. To be fully UL 3700 certified, you need to show that you have an inverter that can do all that, work together with the power meter for breaker masking issues, and then also have a GFCI device. And none of these companies have that yet. That they're still developing that as we are. And we don't expect a fully UL 3700 system to be certified until probably the end of the year.
Thank you, Stefan. And we have several questions about batteries with plug-in solar. One is just basically the cost, and then how does the battery work on that system? Just explain how a battery incorporates into the system and how you use that.
So there's two types of plug-in batteries. And I should probably preface this with saying these plug-in batteries, they're not designed to take your home off grid, and they're not designed to work the way they work as a buffer battery when the power goes down. If they're plugged into your outlet, they have to follow the exact same rules as just plug-in solar. They have to shut down if the grid is down, right? We get by this by allowing our batteries to be modular, so you can actually take them from that on-grid inverter, place them next to your fridge, and plug your fridge in. Yeah, so that's the workaround for now. Um, but there's two types. Either it's what we call DC coupled or AC coupled. DC coupled means that you have solar panels plugging in directly into the battery, and then the battery has an inverter and plugs into an outlet. So it's all kind of in a string. And then our battery, for instance, is an AC coupled battery, meaning you have the solar system plugged in one outlet outdoors, and then you can have the battery indoors plugged into a completely different outlet. So those are the two types essentially. But
Great.
they
And
work as a buffer battery essentially. They increase the efficiency of your system. Sorry.
no problem. Thank you. And then we have a couple of questions on the lifespan of a plug-in system. How long does it last?
Uh, so we use the same components that the traditional solar industry uses, if we're not better, because, well, we sell directly to end consumers. So we have to be stricter about quality, safety, etc., right? There's no buffer between us. Um, so the inverters, panels, they all last depending on type, but they all last, in our experience, from the traditional solar industry, 20 to 30 years. The plug-in industry hasn't been around long enough to say that everything lasts 20 years. But again, you buy a glass solar panel, you can expect it to last 20 to 30 years. You can expect it to provide at least 80% of original capacity by year 25.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that. I've had rooftop solar on my house since 2009 and still going strong, no problems. It's fabulous. I also am very impressed with the Craftstrom panels. The ones that they're selling right now are semi-flexible and they're bifacial, meaning that you can get sunlight on both sides of the panel that can be captured. And they're well engineered in the sense the way that they can be sort of connected to different things, and you've got opportunities for mounting them in various ways. And so, um, yeah, I mean, we just don't know because the plug-in solar phenomena is really less than 10 years old, but there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't be able to last similar to what we're seeing with, traditional solar panels. And this whole notion that, somehow or another they quit working after 15 or 20 years is just BS because that's not, I mean, there's solar panels that were put on a lighthouse in Japan in the 1960s that are still producing.
Yeah, exactly. And the battery design, very similar. Um, our industry at this point, we don't use cheap battery designs, as you might know from, incidents surrounding EV bikes or something from China. We use lithium iron phosphate as a chemistry, so that's very different to your cell phone battery. It's a much more stable chemistry, so it doesn't burn, it doesn't explode. Um, and it's inherently very, very safe, and it lasts a lot longer. You get more charge discharge cycles out of it. You can get up to 7,000 cycles out of these batteries. And we're now only now finding out how resilient these batteries are because the first batteries are reaching 10 plus years.
And you talked in this webinar about what happens when there's a power outage. So if there's a power outage, what happens to that excess electrons flowing from the panel during the shutdown? Does the inverter convert them to heat through electrical resistance?
The inverter, our inverter, for instance, we regulate it on the DC side, so it no, the inverter doesn't heat up anymore. No, the potential is in the panels, so you could theoretically still get a potential out of the panels themselves, but no, the inverter isn't powered.
And speaking of when the power is out, is there a pathway for automatic switching to take the household off the grid during an outage so the panels can provide backup?
No, no, that doesn't exist. At least not yet. No, because again, that would require massive electrical work from by a certified electrician. That's not the point of plug-in solar. As soon as you're thinking about that, then think about traditional solar, for instance. Like we're not replacing traditional solar, as Steve mentioned. We're complementary. We're trying to we're trying to democratize renewable energy. We're trying to bring it to a whole subsection of a market, which we say is larger than the traditional solar market, that can't afford, doesn't have the space, might be renters, those are the people that we cater to.
Yeah, but Stefan, I
Yep.
totally agree with that, and I'm not trying to complicate it. But in theory, if you did have a battery coupled to your system, and you could theoretically plug in certain appliances directly to that battery, that could keep them operational in an outage. So it's not that you're going to be able to stay in your same circuitry in your house. You would need to. So if you were in a situation, instead of letting your food spoil in your freezer or your refrigerator, you could potentially use a battery to buy some time while the repair is going on.
Absolutely. And that's how our batteries are used. They're essentially used like a UPS, right? So you can plug your appliance directly into the off-grid, what we call the off-grid inverter. We've got two inverters. One is the on-grid inverter that's smart, that regulates how much power is taken from the grid based on your solar production or how much you're pushing back into the grid at night, for instance. And then there's an off-grid inverter when the power goes down. That's where you plug in your fridge, for instance. Um, so yes, you can absolutely use those batteries, but the solar system itself, no, that's down.
Yeah.
And what about people who have their a rooftop system? Can they use plug-in, and how does that work with their meter? They're already able to push back. Will they be able to sell back excess with the
Yeah,
plug-in as well?
let me respond to that because as part of our pilot project with KUB, both the SACE office has now basically 25 kilowatts of mounted solar, some with the original TVA Generation Partners program. So that's a buy all sell all of about 10 kW, and then we've recently added another 15 kW. Um, and then when we worked with KUB on the 2,000 watts or the 2 kilowatts of this is this is what's feeding into that dedicated circuit. And we're basically, because we already have the interconnect agreement, we're allowed to feed it back onto the grid with KUB. I've got a similar situation in my house. I've got roughly 11 kW on the rooftop, and I've got about 1,600 kW on an outside circuit at my house as part of this pilot. But because you have the interconnect agreement, so yes, it's a complementary thing. And, again, for the amount I spent, we spend in the office and we spend in the systems, these plug-in solar additions are phenomenal because they're so much lower cost. Matter of fact, at the SACE office, we went ahead to max that out and had an electrician put in a dedicated 20 amp circuit so that we could load it completely up, so to speak, with the 2 kW. So yes, I think there's all kinds of creative ways. And then if you have like a Tesla Powerwall or system, there are ways to have meters that can then feed that information back to the gateway on the power wall so that you can actually track the additional solar that you have. So they can be integrated into existing systems, and you can, they're pretty cool, low cost way to build out more capacity than you already are generating.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Stefan.
No, I completely agree with Stephen. Yeah, they're absolutely a fantastic way to complement your existing system. I would note that, some utilities require you to inform them if you're trying to expand on your own system.
All right. Thank you. Great discussion. And then I wanted to, there was a question about consumer protection. So you talked about UL compliance systems. What about those out there that are not? How can people protect themselves? Is there any consumer protection efforts out there?
From my point of view, I would say talk to in non-governmental organizations like SACE and inform yourself. Um, you don't have to trust us suppliers. There's plenty of organizations like SACE, and just talk to them, see what they recommend, and they will help you. They're happy to help.
Great. Thank you, Stefan.
Well, and I
Go
think
ahead.
just Stacey, to add to that, looking for these, make sure that, again, cannot emphasize more. None of us want somebody to do a DIY system that somehow or another malfunctions and causes a problem because it gives the whole industry a black eye. So be careful there. And then also, make sure that you're dealing with reputable companies Stefan said there's a handful out there. I think there's EcoFlow, BrightSaver's working with some folks. There's some other people that are, in this space, and I think everybody's trying to hold it to a high standard. There's emerging technologies. We've been working with some of the Gizmo folks about even additional things that are going to be able to go on to sort of 240 kind of amp voltage types of things. So there's a lot of really interesting innovation that's going on in the market right now. But, nobody wants to give this industry a black eye. And so we encourage you to hold yourself to a high standard and make sure that, we can say there's never been a lineman killed or seriously injured from solar. And that to me is a huge strength that this industry has. And we need to make sure that people understand that instead of getting us thrown in the same bucket with the fossil guys that are, running the Wild Wild West and letting people plug in suicide cords and kill people.
But I'd like to point out it's a very good question, and you do want to be careful in what you invest. Don't buy the cheapest products on Temu. I mean, it's fairly obvious for some, but there have been attempts by companies, Chinese companies, to import non-certified products to Germany. I remember one big case by Daya, a big Chinese company. Um, someone will try, absolutely, but inherently, as Steve said, we're an industry. We want to keep this market alive. It's in our interest, so we're trying to hold ourselves and others to the highest standard.
Okay, and I'll do one last question here. Are there advantages to running just the battery and the panels? Can you do plug-in only and not deal with the utility?
And not deal with the utility. Well, that's what the legislations are for, essentially. They're getting rid of that one administrative barrier, the interconnection agreement. Now, I think someone in the Q&A asked about non-export systems. That's how we've been selling our systems without the legislation, because with almost all utilities, you can get buy without an interconnection agreement if you're simply not exporting to the grid. So that is absolutely an option. But then we still explain to our customers in a pre-sale conversation typically that you might still want to talk to a utility, but because even PG&E has greenlit our systems so far, and they're pretty conservative.
Yeah, and what we're trying to say is that we want to advocate the utility and the consumer having an open relationship and everybody being above board what's going on. The only one that's going to poison that relationship is this hyper regulation by the utilities where they're, you know, trying to falsely over accentuate issues that are not legitimately at the level that, and they need to work with what consumers want. This is the problem with a lot of our utilities or monopolies, or a lot of our utilities, have this, honestly, this sort of institutional bias against customers doing their own generation. And that's just got to stop, because customers need to be able to do what they want to do behind the meter, as long as it's done safely and as long as they're complying. And, this is why we want to just continue to emphasize that, most of what we're hearing is utilities overplaying safety because they know that the legislative guys haven't taken the time to really study the facts. And that's why we developed this white paper. And so, work with the utilities if they want to work with you. But, the utilities have an obligation to reciprocate the relationship and not interfere with what customers want to do by overblowing safety concerns that aren't actually factually grounded. And they're not applying the same standard, to the fact they're letting these guys plug in all these generators. And so let's be fair. And, I'm not going to tell people, ask for forgiveness instead of permission. I think the goal is try to work with the utility, but if they're not going to work with you, then you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the utility's responsibilities end at the utility meter. What you do in your home is not the utility's responsibility, only if it affects them. Hence, zero export systems as a solution, right? The NEC and UL take care of your home safety. That's not the utility's purpose.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for this discussion. Thank you to our panelists, Amanda Arthur, Stephen Smith, and Stefan Scherer. See their contact information on the slide. This has been a wonderful and educational discussion. For more information, please see our white paper and companion article. Links are in the chat and will be provided in a post-webinar email and on the webinar recording website. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.